Just looking for the sports channel, Gary.
I was 15 when I did my first watch-through of Star Trek the original series. The charm of the original exceeded my expectations. Jumping in totally blind to outside influences was quite the experience. I was immediately endeared to the dynamic of the three central characters, who each serve as a foil to one another in interesting and amusing ways. And these two were way more intense than I was expecting. Especially after having just finished the sequel series, Star Trek The Next Generation, where friendship is just as important but not nearly so romanticized. By comparison, Kirk and Spock seemed kind of gay. But I thought, John, this show came out in like 1966. You're probably just seeing things because you're a gay teenager out in the middle of nowhere, starved of representation. But then I got to Amok Time. I finished the episode, and I was like, that is what I'm talking about. That was fucking gay, and now I'm looking this up. Imagine my vindication in knowing that I was right. This wasn't just any run-of-the-mill subtext either. It was the subtext of the 20th century. I had stumbled upon the holy grail of faggotry. Amok Time is actually iconic. It's had a long-lasting impact on the legacy of Star Trek and the development of fan culture. So naturally, this video is going to be a lot more involved than my previous one. And if you haven't watched that one yet, I recommend watching it first. Amok Time builds upon the lore of The Naked Time in interesting and unexpected ways. And as you've probably guessed, this episode is critically important to the gay reading of Kirk and Spock, which, by the way, was originally referred to by fans as the premise. Amok Time was the first episode of Season 2, and it first aired September 15th, 1967. Here's how the story goes down. Dr. McCoy approaches Captain Kirk and says he's worried about Spock, who's been avoiding meals and acting irritable. Kirk's like, he's probably fine. Nurse Chapel, who is still infatuated with Spock, comes by his quarters with a bowl of Vulcan soup in the hopes that he'll eat something. Spock completely flips his shit and throws the soup at her, then aggressively asserts to the captain that he needs to leave for Vulcan as soon as possible. Kirk goes to Spock's quarters and privately asks him to explain his sudden need for shore leave. Spock evades the question while attempting to keep his composure. The tremble in his hand worsens as Kirk draws closer. Spock insists that his leave needs to be on Vulcan, despite the Enterprise's current course to Altair 6. Kirk is sympathetic to Spock's need given his disturbed behavior and alters course to Vulcan. Starfleet contacts the Enterprise and informs everyone that the presidential inauguration ceremony on Altair 6 has been moved up by a week. Kirk apologizes to Spock for the diversion, and Spock's like, "No, it's okay."
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it.
That night, Kirk lies in bed, contemplating what this could mean for Spock. He contacts the bridge and asks if they could squeeze in a drop-off at Vulcan. And Chekhov's like, "What do you mean? Spock already ordered us to go straight to Vulcan." And Kirk's like, "Fucking seriously?" And he goes over to Spock with his hands on his hips like, "Explain to me what just happened." Spock haltingly explains that he has no memory of changing the course and begs to be locked away. Kirk orders Spock to sickbay. Spock goes to sickbay and he's like, "Hi doctor, I was technically ordered to go to sickbay, which I've just done. So I'm going to my room now." And Bones is like, "Well, my orders were to give you a thorough physical." Which is exactly what Spock receives. Then Bones freaks out and he's like, "You gotta get Spock to Vulcan right away or he'll die. He'll die, Jim." And Kirk's like, "Why?" And Bones explains that Spock's body is being overridden with the Vulcan equivalent of adrenaline, and if something isn't done soon, the stress will kill him. He doesn't know what the diagnosis is, but is convinced that Spock knows what's happening. And he's as tight-lipped about it as an Aldebaran shellmouth. So Kirk once again goes to Spock's quarters to see if he can get an answer. Spock hangs his head and initially refuses to talk to Kirk. Kirk grabs him by the wrist and notices how much he's trembling. Kirk tells Spock rather weightedly that he's an enormous asset to him given his reputation as one of the best officers in the fleet, and he deserves to know why he's going to lose him. After Kirk promises to keep their conversation a secret, Spock finally spills and explains that he is experiencing Pon farr. This is a biological imperative that overtakes Vulcan males once every 7 years. Basically, they go into heat, and they have to mate or they die. Spock woefully states that he wished he could be spared the Pon farr, which also includes a marriage shrouded in ancient ritual. Kirk is sworn to secrecy and vows to get Spock to Vulcan somehow. He attempts to negotiate with Starfleet Command, but it's no use. Altair 6 has been trapped in an interplanetary conflict for years. Now that they're finally electing a new president, Starfleet wants the Enterprise to be one of several ships representing a new era of power and protection from Federation enemies like the Klingons. Kirk decides to risk his career and go to Vulcan anyway. This is the first time that Kirk sacrifices his command to save Spock's life. Spock tells Kirk and McCoy that he would like them to accompany him on the planet's surface. It's traditional for the male to be accompanied by his closest friends. Wait, what? If friendship is normal on Vulcan, then that makes Spock's statement in The Naked Time even fucking gayer. Is it, when I feel friendship for you, I'm ashamed? Or is it, when I feel friendship for you, I'm ashamed? Much to ponder here. You could chalk this up to writing inconsistencies, which are rampant in Star Trek, but that's boring as hell, and I'm not going to do that today. Anyway, they beam down to Spock's home soil, and he explains that he and his fiancée T'Pring were arranged to be married when they were only 7 years old. This arrangement comes in the form of a psychic bond, which he describes as less than a marriage, but more than a betrothal. They exchange some sort of cultural vow that goes like this: parted from me and never parted, never and always touching and touched. The point of the bond is to have both of them be drawn at the right time to the place of Kunat Khalifi, which translates to marriage or challenge. At this time, Kirk notices that T'Pau is officiating their wedding. T'Pau is one of the most influential diplomats on Vulcan and the only person to reject a seat on the Federation Council. T'Pring prefers Ston, a full-blooded Vulcan present at the wedding, and she exercises the ancient rite of Khalifi, the challenge. T'Pring is in an especially messed up situation. She is fated to become the property of whoever she marries. The Khalifi at least ensures her right to choose another man to battle for her hand in marriage. This is the only way she can exert any legal control over her fate. And she's very logical about it too. Instead of risking Ston's life, she chooses Kirk to battle Spock, assuming that neither of them will want her when the challenge is over, so she can be with Ston regardless of the outcome. Spock's proximity to T'Pring causes him to fall into the Plak Tau, basically a horny madness. Kirk accepts the challenge, refusing to back out in front of T'Pau. Spock uses the last threads of his sanity to beg T'Pau to forbid Kirk from participating. He is unaware of the fact that this is a fight to the death, and Spock will lose all control and do what he must to have T'Pring. T'Pau's like, No. And the battle with the Lurpa begins. Spock immediately slices open Kirk's shirt, exposing his chest. It quickly becomes clear that the atmosphere is too thin, and he falls to the ground, huffing and sweating with his breasts exposed. McCoy shoots him up with something to compensate, and battle continues with the An Wun. The battle has a few suggestive moments, especially when they grapple on the ground. Spock also chokes him out over a bed of coals. At the climax of the challenge, Spock strangles Kirk and suddenly becomes lucid. He is unaware of the fact that Dr. McCoy had actually injected Kirk with something that would simulate death. Spock is now in command of the Enterprise, so he orders McCoy to return to the ship and plot a course for the nearest starbase. After T'Pring explains herself, Spock relinquishes ownership of her to Ston, warning him that having is not so pleasing a thing after all as wanting. It is not logical, but it is often true. For the first time in Star Trek, Spock uses the Vulcan salute and utters the phrase, "Live long and prosper." Even if you've never seen Star Trek, you're probably familiar with this concept, which all started right here.
Live long, T'Pau, and prosper.
Live long and prosper, Spock.
I shall do neither. I have killed my captain and my friend.
When he beams up, he goes over to McCoy and explains that he'll be resigning and turning himself in. Kirk, having been revived in sickbay, sneaks up behind him and surprises him. Spock is so overjoyed to know that Jim is alive that he expresses the fact openly, until he remembers that McCoy and Nurse Chapel are present. Kirk explains how he survived, and then Bones asks about T'Pring. Spock's like, "Oh yeah, about that. It must have been all that battling we did. After I thought I'd murdered Kirk, I lost all interest in T'Pring. The madness was gone." And Bones is like, "Okay?" Uhura informs the captain that T'Pau officially approved their diversion to Vulcan, so his career is saved. As Kirk and Spock make their way to the bridge, Bones pokes fun at Spock's reaction and suggests that they're about to see an emotional scene that would have brought the house down. And yeah, that's the episode. Spock struggles with his sexuality and the patriarchal demands of Vulcan society. Kirk sacrifices his career for him, and the climax of the sweaty battle with his best friend satisfies Spock's deadly reproductive urges. The end. This story not only highlights the parallels between violence and sex, but it also portrays two individuals who are suffering under the demands of an outdated tradition. T'Pring is faced with the reality of becoming literal property, and does what she can to gain back an ounce of control over her situation. T'Pring and Captain Kirk actually have something in common. They're both just doing their best to protect the person they love, even if that causes chaos for everyone else. Spock, ironically, views marriage with T'Pring as a death sentence. He spent his entire life overcompensating for his human half and wishing that things like his love for Kirk didn't exist. However, when faced with Pon farr and Kunat Khalifi, the epitome of male Vulcanhood, he expresses disdain for his birthright. A lot of this is because it would effectively end his career, which is heavily tied to his identity at this point, but also it would mean separation from Jim, who's become more important to him than he ever bargained on. Now I have to talk about the impact that this episode had on fan culture and on Star Trek as a whole. Aside from the animated series, there's a 10-year gap in content between the original series and the first movie. In the 1970s, the legacy of Star Trek survived through reruns, which rapidly popularized the franchise with a wider audience. Despite its cancellation in 1969, the original Star Trek fandom continued to grow exponentially. At this time, the show was frequently celebrated through fan-organized conventions and the circulation of zines, which contained essays, poetry, and fan fiction. The most popular subgenre of fan fiction was referred to as slash fiction. This new subgenre focused almost exclusively on the tension between Kirk and Spock, and an overwhelming amount of stories referred back to Amok Time. Basically, every gay fan work in the Western world has been influenced in part by this episode. But wait, there's more! Many official Star Trek books at the time were written by mega fans, and you can find elements of the premise in quite a few of them. If you ever run into a piece of official Star Trek media that suggests that Kirk and Spock had some sort of psychic bond, you've probably found yourself a secret premise enjoyer. I'm not exactly sure where this psychic bond thing popped up first, but it at least goes back to the early 70s, and will become relevant in a later video. Some of these fans were also friends of Star Trek creator and executive producer Gene Roddenberry. If there is or ever was a god of Star Trek, this guy was it. He even contributed to Star Trek Lives, which was one of the earliest publications to discuss the Star Trek fandom. There's a whole chapter dedicated to the analysis of Kirk and Spock's relationship and its effect on fans, which was received positively by Roddenberry. One of several statements he made on the matter can be found in this book. I definitely designed it as a love relationship, and I hope that for men who have been afraid of such relationships, that Kirk and Spock would encourage them to be able to feel love and affection, true affection, love, friendship, and deep respect that was the relationship I tried to draw. I think I also tried to draw a feeling of belief that very few of us are complete unto ourselves. It's quite a lovely thing, where two halves make a whole. When Roddenberry finally tried his hand at a novel in 1979, the result was insanely queer-coded. And yes, he does refer back to Amok Time more than once. You'll hear more about this in later videos. So this is the life cycle of gay space shit in the 70s. Star Trek fed fanfiction, which fed Gene Roddenberry, who in turn recycled the gay back into official Star Trek channels. Nature is beautiful. So if the general subtext is gasoline, and the episode Amok Time is the ignition, then who lit the match? It's time to talk about Theodore Sturgeon. Theodore Sturgeon was an author whose output spanned almost 4 decades. He was especially influential to the genre of speculative fiction and wrote a number of short stories and novellas from the 40s to the 60s. His work was unique at the time for its focus on human sensitivity. He had a noticeable fascination with psionics and with those who exist on the fringes of society. He is considered to be the first person to write science fiction stories featuring gay men as sympathetic characters. Male sexuality and the repression of burning desire was a common motif in his works. Science fiction writer Samuel R. Delany claimed that Sturgeon was bisexual, which really would not surprise me in the least. One of Sturgeon's most famous short stories, The World Well Lost, was published in 1953. Sometime in the future, 2 psychic aliens come to Earth to experience its wonders. The people of Earth are so enraptured with the aliens and their love for one another that they're deemed the Loverbirds and become worldwide celebrities. However, the isolationist planet Durbanu demands the return of the Loverbirds, claiming that they're fugitives of the law. It's up to 2 inseparable space sailors to return them to Durbanu. Roots, the captain, is an aggressive ladies' man, while his first officer Grunty is a large, nonverbal individual with an active mind. In just a few pages, Sturgeon paints a complex picture of these 4 individuals, each of them suffering the consequences of a homophobic society. He also explores the deteriorating effects of life in the closet. It's one of my favorite short stories, and it holds up insanely well over 60 years later. The prose is absolutely gorgeous, and I'd recommend it to anyone who's into sci-fi or gay history. So yeah, that was the guy who wrote Amok Time. He also wrote the episode Shore Leave. Although it was altered a lot more than Amok Time, there's an infamous scene that he no doubt had a hand in.
Anything from the landing party?
They should be sending up a report momentarily, Captain.
Oh,
Something wrong?
a kink in my back. That's it. No, little higher, please. Push hard. Dig it in there, Mr. Thank you, Yeoman. That's sufficient.
This scene is even mentioned as an example of gay subtext on Sturgeon's Wikipedia page. Well, that's all for this episode of Star Trek is Gay.
Finally!
I hope you learned something new or at least found this entertaining. If you've watched Amok Time or have read Sturgeon's work, please let me know what you think of either of those things. Until next time.